I'm Dr. Richard von Fuchs. Before I was a university teacher, I used to read the news on the radio. There's a story that I'd like to draw your attention to. I know a lot of the news is about where can you get married if you're gay, where can you smoke pot legally, whose breast popped out of her dress. But some stories are very serious and directly affect you. This says that, according to a report by Oxfam, 62 of the richest people in the world now have the same amount of wealth as the 3.5 billion of the poorest people in the world. Now, wealth is not the same as income. Wealth is owning a hotel. Income is when you rent rooms. If you don't have any hotel guests, you still have something that you can sell. And this is something that most people simply don't have. When I was a child, I came back from Sunday school in Wood River, Illinois, and I said, why can't we help the poor people? Why can't we give away something of what we have? Because we had enough. And I was told, as most people were told, and many still believe, if you divided all the money in the world equally, all of us would be poor, and none of us would have anything. Now, I was also told that Santa Claus was going to come down our chimney, which is about this big around, and then go back up the chimney and visit all the children in the world in a few hours. And the story that you can't help people by dividing the wealth is just as true as Santa Claus in our chimney. So let's imagine that we took the money from the 62 people who are checking into the mental hospital and now don't need to worry about it anymore. If we gave it to the poorest 3.5 billion people in the world, their income would double. You can check my math if you're skeptical. Now, the Oxfam report says the disproportionate growth at the top is keeping those at the bottom from climbing out of poverty. What does that mean? It means what they get, you don't get. Since 2010, these richest 62 have had their income go up 44%, while the people in the bottom half of the world saw their income go down 41%. My parents were supporters of the Republican Party, and like most young people, I didn't question that. We were somewhat better off than many families. My father was a consulting chemist. He had 76 patents, and he worked and worked and worked. He really liked working. Our vacations were short, and very often they got shorter because he had to go back to work. And that seemed fair enough, because the people who get out of bed early, as opposed to those who don't, the people who study, compared to those who go out drinking, they should keep the fruits of their labor. And I went along with that. It seemed to make a lot of sense to me. I saw the Republican Party as the champions of hard work and virtue and sobriety and all the things that Benjamin Franklin talked about. Well, that meant that the Democrats had to be the opposite. You know the fable about the ants who work hard and don't have any fun, and the grasshopper who plays the violin and sing and dance, and then when it gets cold, they said, help me, help me. And I also grew up in the story of the little red hen. You remember, planted the wheat, harvested, baked the bread, and then all the freeloaders, the bums, Mitt Romney's takers, came along and said, hey, I'd like some of that bread. Since I got my BA in political science over 50 years ago, I have not only studied political science, I've been a campaign manager and a candidate. I owned a small business. I was a leader of a small local of a trade union for a short time, and I was a journalist. I thought I knew something about economics and the distribution of wealth. But I was stunned when I looked on the Big Think on the internet, and I saw a graph by Stephen Mazie, and it looks like this. Each tiny little figure that's not so visible is one person out of 100 in America, and this is the wealth. So here, the first 10%, invisible. 20%, not much. 30%, they only become visible about a little over 30%. So when these people die, they will have more debts than assets. The bottom half of people in America have a total of 2% of the wealth. As you go up, it gets better and better. Each one of these little gray lines stands for 1%, 1%, 1%. You can see the differences get quite dramatic. It wasn't easy to cut this so precisely. This takes us up to 99%. Oh, what about the 1%? Well, let's see. These people are worth something. They get 10 lines. And I thought, well, how do I make it tall enough? I'll change these 10 lines for the top 1% into one really big line. We tried this in my room and it went through the roof. And that's what their wealth is. In the last few years, I've had 5 sets of missionaries who are Americans living up the hill from me. And of course, they all vote Republican. And they share my values that I believe in a stable family and hard work and getting up early and so forth. But I said, you know, the Republican Party isn't just about hard work and letting hardworking people save their money. It's also about cutting taxes for the rich. When the second President Bush was elected, he announced weeks after he was inaugurated that there was going to be a large tax cut for these people. And I thought, who was asking for that? I don't recall demonstrations or people writing letters to the editor saying, we have to lower the taxes for these people. Back in the 1950s, under President Eisenhower, the rich people in America paid up to 90% of their income in income tax. It's a lot less now. When the older President Bush said the idea of cutting taxes so that we would all be better off was voodoo economics, I wanted to say, right on. It really is. The younger President Bush did it, following in the footsteps of President Reagan and the rest of them. This is not limited to America. In Britain and many other countries, people who call themselves conservative actually want to cut taxes for the people who have an amazing abundance of wealth, and that is their main priority. In England, we've heard that the income tax has made the rich people poor, and now they have to show tourists around their estates. I don't think they're doing it in old clothes. After 100 years of the so-called progressive income tax, the distribution of the wealth is about the same. We've had socialist parties in and out of power for over 150 years, and this concentration of wealth at the top is accelerating now. Now, Mitt Romney said, sure, I have more money than most people, but I'm a job creator. Well, please, turn off the television. Look out the window. Look around you at the real world. Is anybody creating a lot of jobs? Do we need a lot of jobs? There are a lot of people unemployed, but our shelves are overflowing with goods. It's not like the communist countries in the past, where the shelves were empty. We have lots. So the idea that he was going to create jobs is nonsense. The money is really going into savings accounts of large corporations, into offshore banks. The amount, since many of the banks are still secret, isn't known, but could be up to 1/3 of the money in the world. The super rich are not your feudal masters. I had an argument with a postman in Toronto, and he said, well, they're better than we are, and they take care of us, and they give us jobs, and we have to do whatever they tell us, and we have to vote for their parties, and we have to cut their taxes. An example of this concentration of wealth going up rapidly is the Koch brothers in America. At the beginning of the Obama presidency, they had about $8 billion in wealth. 8 years later, they have $16 billion. Now, did your total wealth double in the last 8 years? It makes me wonder why these two gentlemen want to fund campaigns from right-wing politicians as if they weren't doing well enough under the status quo. Wealth does not accumulate at the top only from hard work. I don't think anybody works 380 times harder than the next person. So my father worked more, but not that much. And nobody works 380 times longer. But commonly, in America today, a chief executive officer asks for and gets 380 times the salary of his average employee. Now in Japan, the boss settles for a mere 10 times the salary of the average employee. But around the world and in Europe, this tendency, started in America, is spreading. My main message is really simple. Most of you are here. Why are you voting Republican when their whole program is to cut the taxes for these folks who can say things like, Mr. McCain, how many houses do you own? I don't really know. Does this person need a tax cut? I don't think so. But there is a belief in America that government is bad, and if I work really hard, I'll go from the log cabin up to the White House. Amazingly enough, most American presidents, Democrats and Republicans, have had a close tie with the Rockefellers since World War II. Does this sound like a log cabin to you? Does this sound like a realistic view of the world? It really isn't. It's fantasy land. So you might wonder, if you're not a chief executive officer, how is it that these few people got all this money? Part of the reason is the unfair tax system. If you work at a checkout, if you shovel asphalt, your tax rate is significantly higher than if you sit home and collect dividends or your capital gains. Now, if you find this too complicated, just go back to watching TV and keep voting for people who want to cut taxes for the super rich. But seriously speaking, even Warren Buffett said, it's unfair for me to pay a significantly lower tax than my chauffeur and my gardener. If you continue this process for several decades, where do you think the money's going to go? Milton Friedman and the free trade people who want to have no more barriers to labor or capital so that auto workers in Canada can compete with Mexican auto workers who get $4 an hour. Gee, where's the job going to go? And people who used to work in textile mills in the Carolinas can compete with people in Bangladesh. Isn't that freedom? There is no free markets. All markets have been organized and managed by people for all time. Now, some of my Republican neighbors used to tell me, you know, where we live, there are all these people who sleep till noon and then deal drugs, and they're just no good, they're bums. I said, wait a minute. I grew up in Niagara Falls, New York, which is the eastern end of the Rust Belt. After 56 years, I went back to show my son my old home that I have an emotional connection to. And 1/2 of the population was gone. My elementary school has been torn down. Well, the jobs aren't there. So when the textile jobs also went to Asia or to Central America, these people suddenly didn't get a weak moral character. They were the losers in class war. Now, Republicans tend to say, if Democrats talk about income distribution, oh, that's class warfare. Well, there is a class war, and most of you have lost. Milton Friedman is still running the economic policy of America. Free trade is still in the saddle, and the results are disastrous. Naomi Klein described it this way. Free market ideology may still bind the imagination of our elites, but for most of the general public, it has been drained of the power to persuade. The disastrous track record of the past 3 decades of neoliberal policy is simply too apparent. Each new blast of statistics about the tiny band of global oligarchs who control half the world's wealth exposes the policy of privatization and deregulation for the thinly veiled license to steal that they always were. You've never heard of me, and you may doubt what I say, but this information comes from Stephen Mazie, Robert Reich, Naomi Klein, Joseph Stiglitz, and Thomas Piketty.